Alright team, how's things? Thank you for listening, thank you for your time. We're going to have a special look today, because today is a special date, which means it's a special occasion for a special fight. It's November the 5th, which is Bonfire Night in the UK, and if you're a hardcore fight fan, that only means one thing. It's the anniversary, the 39th to be exact, of a tremendous occasion in British boxing. Mark Kaylor versus Errol Christie, in what on paper was merely an eliminator for the British Middleweight Championship, but away from the ring it meant a whole lot more. So join us for the next few minutes. We take a look at the event that was Mark Kaylor versus Errol Christie. The 1980s in Great Britain were a time of intense social upheaval and racial tensions. Many neighbourhoods were still reeling from clashes and riots that had brought issues of race, identity and inequality to the forefront. Errol Christie, a skilled black fighter from Coventry, and Mark Kaylor, a gritty white boxer from London's East End, came to embody these divisions, rightly or wrongly. To many, their fight represented more than just two men battling for middleweight ranking. It seemed to capture the divide in British society itself. The intensity leading up to the fight reached a boiling point during a press conference, where the fighters engaged in a physical altercation outside a London casino. The scene exploded when a verbal exchange between the two escalated into a full-on brawl, with Kaylor and Christie trading punches before security could intervene. This shocking incident fed directly into the media narrative, which now framed the fight as a raw and visceral clash, stoking the already febrile atmosphere surrounding the bout. For fans, this wasn't just a boxing match, it had become personal, and people from both fighters' communities rallied around their champions with fervour. According to Christie, after an uneventful stare-down event, Kaylor had a conversation with a member of his team, after which his demeanour took on an aggressive edge. Christie recalled Kaylor allegedly making a racial slur, a moment that felt like a switch flipping. What had been a routine face-off instantly turned into a chaotic brawl near a pond outside the venue, with both men exchanging blows in front of stunned onlookers. This altercation lit a fuse that sent excitement, tension and anticipation among fight fans into overdrive. Kaylor never denied the alleged comment, and that silence only fueled public fascination and speculation about the brewing animosity between the two. If we can take a brief aside for a moment, the footage of that brawl, it was filmed, but if you try and find it nowadays, if you can find more than 2 or 3 seconds of it, you are a very lucky man. It is among pre-fight press conference brawls for fights. It is horrible from what I can recall, but regardless, again, if you can find that, you're doing a good job. The pre-Skype fight scuffle added fuel to the fire and transformed the bout into a high-stakes confrontation, attracting attention far beyond the typical boxing audience. Fans were eager to see this score settled, and each camp brought their own charged energy into the Wembley Arena on fight night. This fight was no longer just a sporting event, it had taken on the air of a cultural showdown. The crowd at the Wembley Arena were electric, divided along lines that mirrored the tensions outside the ring. The supporters of each fighter brought with them the hopes, frustrations and tensions of their communities, with fans ready to shout and clash over almost every punch. The atmosphere was almost gladiatorial, with fans not only eager to see their man win, but to also prove a point, as if the result was something larger than the sport. As fight night approached, Wembley Arena was chosen as the venue, a familiar stomping ground for Kaylor, who had built a loyal and often rowdy fan base there. Kaylor supporters, many of whom were also West Ham loyalists, as the football club, were known for their vocal, sometimes unruly support. Christie, meanwhile, though from Coventry, had attracted backing from Birmingham City's Zulu hooligans, a group that had no love lost for West Ham fans and seemed eager to use this event as an excuse to clash with them rather than support Errol Christie. Kaylor's manager Terry Lawless understood the combustible nature of the situation. Unofficially a co-promoter of the event, the official promoter of record on the night was Mike Barrett. Lawless took extraordinary steps to manage the night's atmosphere. He enlisted Cass Pennant, a notable West Ham fan and respected figure in the security world, to oversee the crowd on fight night. Pennant was a recognised face who commanded respect, and in the days leading up to the fight, he made it clear that violence among fans would not be tolerated. Through Pennant's influence, the message spread that any trouble could lead to severe consequences. Beyond security personnel, the event saw unprecedented measures, including an alcohol ban inside the venue to prevent fueling any unruly behaviour. Police officers patrolled inside the venue, an unusual precaution that underscored the event's charged nature. Even the fighters' ring entrances were kept minimal, avoiding the fanfare typical of boxing matches in an effort to keep emotions from boiling over. Lawless and his promotional team were determined that this fight, which had taken on a life of its own, wouldn't erupt into chaos. As the fight unfolded, the crowd's intensity seemed to mirror the brutal back and forth happening inside the ropes. Christie, with his fluid skill and movement, was slick and elusive early on, representing a different, more refined boxing style. Kaylor, on the other hand, embodied grit and determination, fighting with a kind of street-level toughness that resonated with his fan base. Every punch, dodge and movement in the ring was cheered or jeered with an energy that bordered on the feverish for the first 2 rounds. The Kaylor-Christie bout is remembered today, not just for the fight itself, but for everything it represented. The personal animosity between the fighters, amplified by their pre-fight brawl, set the stage for a confrontation that symbolised the tensions of the time. For many, this fight was an expression of pride, anger and identity. The spectacle around the fight also set a precedent. Rarely had a British boxing match been so heavily infused with the social issues of the day, and it created a model for the intense, personal rivalries that the sport would continue to see. For fans and observers, the Kaylor-Christie fight was a moment when the world outside the ring seemed to bleed into the sport itself, and that fusion of boxing, along with societal issues, left an indelible mark on British sports culture. The bout is endured in memory because it was more than just a fight. It was a reflection of the culture and social fabric of the UK at the time. Even now, almost 40 years later, the fight stands as a reminder of how deeply personal and raw boxing can be, serving as a lasting testament to a time and place where sport became an arena for larger conflicts, and with Mark Kaylor and the late Errol Christie as its unwilling symbols. As for the fight itself, I don't know if you've seen it, but on this Bonfire Night, if you have a spare 36 minutes, that's the longest version I can find on YouTube, it is definitely worth a watch. I personally had totally forgotten about the multiple knockdowns that took place earlier in the fight, having watched it many, many years ago. And the things that come back now, which strike me when I watched it just recently as I researched this piece, are simple. Harry Carpenter, his commentary is sharp and to the point, and at times he sometimes goes minutes without even commentating on the action. It really does add to the effect. Something else I noticed is that due to the production levels of the time, nowadays if this fight was to take place, it would have at least a couple of other cameramen on action, and also there would be a couple of ringside microphones, which would also add to the atmosphere and the occasion of the contest. Mark Kaylor was a lot more stiff back than I remembered, very straight up and down, washing board type, but that was his style. And one other thing I also picked up from the occasion was that it seems to me that the fighters nowadays of 21st century are in a lot more better physical condition, but their actual technique and skill and knowing what to do and when to do is totally different to what happened in the 1980s. Errol Christie, for his part, is absolutely sublime amateur. I think if he wasn't undefeated, he wasn't far off. ABA champion, England captain, represented his country many times. I don't think he ever lost in an England vest. European junior champion, and he really was going to be a superstar as he turned professional. With Frank Warren support, he went on an unbeaten run to start off with, but some unbelievably skewered matchmaking. I can't think of too many other fighters that have fought twice against dangerous opponents who are at least 2 weight classes above, and on the actual weigh-in, Errol Christie twice fought opponents who weighed more on the weigh-in, who weighed more than 7 pounds more than him, and it's no surprise that he lost both those fights inside the distance. In my personal view, Errol Christie, who never fought below 159 pounds off the top of my head, and the highest he fought at was 164, judging by the amount of inside schedule defeats he suffered, and you combine that with the skill that he had, he's either one of those natural athletes who was just not designed to be a professional boxer but found it anyway, or, in my own personal view, I do believe that he should have been lower than middleweight. I think some of those defeats that he suffered were because he was fighting within the wrong weight class, and that was something that in that fight with Mark Kaylor you can definitely see after about 3 rounds, when Mark Kaylor seems to be the bigger, stronger man. Unfortunately, we lost Errol Christie in 2017, a man who'd never even as much as held a cigarette, passed away from lung cancer. An absolute tragedy. In 2009, Steve Bunce managed to get Mark Kaylor and Errol Christie together for a long-distance phone call. Unfortunately for us, it seemed to be more about Steve Bunce Cass Pennant, who also joined on phone, and also Jim McDonnell, who had a phone call as well. They seemed to dominate the narrative more than the actual boxers themselves. And Kaylor and Christie actually only exchanged a couple of lines between them. They did promise, however, that Mark Kaylor and Errol Christie would get together with the help of Steve Bunce, and they would meet, as apparently the amount of times they've met since their fight you can count on one hand. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and Errol Christie passed away before he and Mark Kaylor could ever meet up. So 39 years on, the occasion still lives on. It's a fight that, if you saw it, I didn't at the time, I was only very small, but those who were there at the time will tell you it was an occasion. And also, if you go back and watch the fight, one of the other oddities of that bout is that halfway through the first round, when you take in consideration all the tensions and troubles that were leading up into the fight, can you believe that a firework went off halfway through that first round, and it was almost as if a gun had been shot. With that, we will leave it there. Thank you very much if you made it this far. So I said, it's 39 years today since Mark Kaylor and Errol Christie exchanged hands in a British Middleweight Championship eliminator, which at the time, both men shared £82,500, which was a record for a non-British title fight. In one way, I think we can be glad to say that we've come a long way since in terms of boxers and their recompense. But for now, that just reminds me to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time. This is LVD Sport. Always keep the gloves up and your chin down. And we are out for the count.